They will tell you a factory wife had nothing to work with. I have 3 notebooks on a shelf in my study that disagree. 62 years of disagreement, written every Friday by a Polish steelworker's widow on a hill above the Monongahela. 66 years from a Swedish carpenter's wife in Lawrenceville. 106 years from an Irish brakeman's wife whose mother had started the book in 1903. 3 women, 3 neighborhoods, 3 husbands who carried a lunch bucket to a single paycheck. 25 rules in those notebooks taken together, and what those rules built was a row house held in one family for 90 years, a hat shop on Brereton Street, college diplomas from Penn State, and a credit union account that paid for great-grandchildren's tuitions in the year 2018. I have counted the rules. I am going to read them to you. But before I name the first rule, I need you to understand what 1 mil paycheck actually meant on a Friday in 1928. $22 a week, 8 children, coal for the stove, 50 cents to the parish, $2 to a sister in Poland the wife would never see again. The mill priced her husband's lungs against her children's shoes, and Helena Kowalska answered with a notebook and 6 tin envelopes on an oilcloth. I will get to the page where she opened the bad week envelope for the first time. I promise. But first, stay with me. The room I am opening was kept private for 60 years. Tell me in the comments, whose factory wife grandmother kept a book like this in your family, and what neighborhood she kept it in? I read every one. Helena Kowalska arrived in Pittsburgh in the autumn of 1923. She was 20 years old. Her husband, Stanislav, had come the year before. He met her at the train station with a borrowed coat. They climbed the hill to a row house on Dobson Street in Polish Hill. 3 rooms, a coal stove, a window that faced St. Stanislaus across the rooftops. The oilcloth stayed on that kitchen table for 43 years. I sat at it in 1975. I sat at it in 1986, the last time, the Friday she handed me the notebook. She called it the Zeszyt, the Friday book. It lived on a shelf above the stove, between a tin of salt and a small holy card of the Black Madonna. Every Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, after Stanisław had walked down the hill to the swing shift, Helena put the kettle on, took down the Zeszyt, and emptied 6 tin envelopes onto the oilcloth. The kettle hissed. The kitchen smelled of cabbage and coke smoke from the open window. The light came in through the curtains at a slant that fell across the table the same way every week for 40 years. Helena sat. She sharpened a pencil with a paring knife. She opened the book. The first envelope was for the rent. $11 a month, paid on the first, never late, not once across 62 years. That is Rule 1. The second envelope was for the church. 50 cents a week to St. Stanislaus, $1 at Easter, $1 at Christmas. The pastor knew her by her envelope, not her name. Rule 2. The third was the funeral fund. Every house on Polish Hill kept one. You did not die owing the parish. You did not leave your husband's widow to ask the neighbours for the price of a coffin. That was the rule of the hill. Helena put a dime in this envelope every Friday for 62 years. The dime never moved unless someone died. Rule 3. The fourth envelope was for the children's shoes. $1 a week, summer through spring. New shoes for each child in September, oversized by half a size, stuffed with newspaper in the toe so they would grow into them across 2 winters. Rule 4. The fifth was the wedding fund. Helena started a wedding envelope the year each daughter was born. By the time the first girl was 12, the envelope had $38. By the time she was 18, it had bought the dress, the cake, and the rented hall above the parish meeting room. 4 daughters, 4 envelopes, started across 4 birth years. None opened until the daughter was 19 or older. Rule 5. The 6th envelope was for what Helena called the bad week. The week the mill cut hours. The week a child needed the doctor. The week the rent went up. It sat at the back. It was the last one she touched and the first one she refilled. Stanislav was not allowed to know what was inside it. Rule 6. Picture the 6 tins for a moment. They were not all the same size. The funeral tin was the smallest, a tobacco tin that had once belonged to Stanislav's father. The shoes tin was the largest, a biscuit tin from a Polish bakery on Brereton that closed in 1940. The wedding tin had its lid taped with cloth tape 4 times across the years because the lid had loosened and Helena would not lose a coin. Sigrid in Lawrenceville did not use tins. She used a cigar box from Eric's foreman. Mary used a candy jar her mother Bridget had been given by a boarder in 1911. The vessels did not matter. The discipline did. And on the shelf above the oilcloth, not in her kitchen, mind you, but in mine, 60 years later, there are 2 other notebooks that sit beside Helena's, organized by the year I received them. Sigrid Lindgren's leather-bound almanac from Lawrenceville. Mary O'Connor's family account book, started by her mother Bridget in 1903 and continued until Mary died in 2009. Sigrid was a Swedish carpenter's wife. Mary was the wife of a Pennsylvania railroad brakeman. They never met Helena. They never knew each other. But their notebooks rhyme, Friday by Friday, season by season, and the rules in them, taken together, are the architecture of how a working-class woman built a generation's wealth on a single paycheck. That is the bookshelf I'm going to walk you down. The walk is the episode. Stanislav Kowalski worked at the Jones and Laughlin Steel Company on the south side, across the Monongahela from where the family lived. He earned $22 a week in 1928, 26 by 1940, 31 by 1950. He worked at that mill for 33 years. The mill killed him in 1956, at the age of 54. Black lung complications, the parish said, though the mill called it nothing for another 13 years. The mill did not price labour. The mill priced a man's body against the cost of replacing him. Stanislav's lungs were inside that price. So were Erik Lindgren's hands, the Swedish carpenter who fell from a Lawrenceville roof in 1958 at the age of 65. So was Patrick O'Connor's chest, the Irish brakeman who died of lung cancer in 1979, 3 years into his railroad pension. 3 men, 3 industries, 3 immigrant neighborhoods. The same calculus. And every wife ran a second economy at the kitchen table to make $22 stretch where the mill had decided it should not. She did it through the parish. That is Rule 7, the Polish Hill Widows' Circle. After Stanislav died, Helena was one of 11 widows in the parish. The circle met in the St. Stanislav's basement on a Saturday morning, with a tin coffee pot on a hot plate and a ledger on a folding table. Each widow brought a quarter, or 50 cents. The money pooled, and when the next man on the hill died of the lungs, the circle paid for his coffin and his wake. They called it the koło, the circle. Rule 8 is the parish funeral fee rule. St. Stanislaus charged for the burial mass the way every parish did, and the fee was punitive to a widow on a 1-week late pension. Helena paid for hers in dimes from the funeral envelope across 30 years. For any widow on the hill who could not, the Colwar covered it, and the pastor knew not to ask twice. Rule 9 I learned from Mary O'Connor. The Catholic Burial Society at St. Augustine's in Lawrenceville ran back to the 1880s. Every adult contributed a few cents a week. The society paid the funeral, no exceptions. Mary's mother Bridget joined in 1907. Mary continued the dues until 2003. 96 unbroken years across 2 generations. The funeral cost nothing because it had been paid for 60 years in advance, a few cents at a time. Rule 10 I learned from Sigrid. The neighbour calendar. Sigrid's almanac had 2 facing pages for each year. On the left, the calendar of markdowns, which butcher cut prices Wednesday, which baker Saturday afternoon, which dairy delivered short measure on Mondays. On the right, the calendar of giving, whose family was due to lose a wage that month, when each Lutheran family's lean week was coming. Sigrid baked 2 loaves every Saturday from 1920 until her daughter took her in. 65 years of Saturday loaves, 1 for the table, 1 for a neighbour whose week had been hard. There is a phrase for what these 3 women built. The economists call it household capital formation. The wives called it the envelopes, the almanac, and the funeral club. They built the middle class 1 Friday at a time on a single paycheck, and the country took the credit for it after. Rule 11 is Sigrid's 4-season pantry. 40 quarts of tomatoes in October, cabbage and beets and pickles put up against the long January draw. By April, the pantry was at its low line. By June, the garden was feeding the house and the pantry was being rebuilt. 65 years of monthly inventories. The pantry was not food. The pantry was a balance sheet you could eat. Rule 12 is Mary's boarders' table. Bridget ran a boarders' table out of the Lawrenceville kitchen for 40 years, 4 men at a time, $5 a week in 1908, $12 by 1950. One of the boarders, John Sullivan from County Mayo, paid Bridget back in 1933 at the bottom of the Depression the rent he had owed her from 1911, 22 years late. Bridget recorded the repayment in red pencil. The kitchen was a small bank. Rule 13 is Helena's remittance. $2 a month to her sister Antonina in a village outside Krakow, every month from 1925 until 1955. 30 years. The envelope lived behind the funeral envelope on the shelf. It was the only envelope Helena never opened in a bad week. Not when the mill cut pay in 1932, not when Stanislav broke his arm in 1938, not after he died in 1956. The remittance was sacred. Now the page. October 7th, 1932. The mill had cut hours. $22 a week had become $12. The parish had asked for the same 50 cents. The rent man had not changed his calendar. Helena's entry that Friday is 6 lines in pencil, with 1 word smudged where a tear must have hit before the ink dried. In English, rent, $11. Paid. Church, 25 cents. Half. Funeral, 5 cents. Reduced. Shoes, 0 this week. The children have shoes. Wedding, 25 cents. Sophia is 9. The envelope continues. Bad week, opened. $3 taken. Stove coal. The bin was empty. In the margin, in 3 words, Tu jensui korvie. The bad week. The circle knows. That is Rule 14. The bad week envelope opened for the first time after 8 years on the shelf. Rule 15. The shoes envelope not opened. The September shoes were still good and she would not raid one to pad another. Rule 16. The church envelope reduced before the children's were touched. Rule 17. The wedding envelope continued, even at a quarter, because Sophia was 9 and it would matter when she was 18. For the first 6 years I visited Helena, I thought the envelopes were superstition. I was 28. I had a nursing degree. I had a system. I thought Helena had a peasant system. My own mother corrected me in 1978 in the kitchen on Pius Street. Eleanor, Helena has been running an annuity book for 50 years. You walked in and called it a tradition. I was 30 years late. Rule 18. Sigrid's waiting week. Eric's wages allowed a small monthly amount for non-essentials, and Sigrid required a 1-week waiting period before anyone entered the house. The almanac has both the requested and the actually bought, with the difference labelled in Swedish, sparat, saved. Over 40 years, that column added up to $1,411. It paid the down payment on the Lawrenceville house in 1941, built one impulse refused at a time. Rule 19. Mary's school shoes in September rule. 1 new pair per child every September, no exceptions, paid for from a saving begun the previous January. The 5 O'Connor children got new shoes on the first day of school for 22 consecutive Septembers between 1946 and 1967. The September discipline started in January. Rule 20. The grocery route. Helena walked to 3 markets a week and knew the day each one marked down meat. Tuesday on Brereton, Wednesday on Liberty, Saturday on Dobson, where the day-old bread came out at 4. The route was the savings. Now, the receipt the title promised, the one that built generational wealth on a single paycheck. The receipt is dated April 3rd, 1947. Sophia Kowalski had just turned 21. Her wedding envelope had been started in 1926. 21 years of dimes and quarters and the occasional Christmas dollar. $412 on the day she got engaged. But Sophia did not want a wedding hall. She wanted a hat and mending shop on Brereton Street. The fixtures from the retiring Polish widow ahead of her were 340. Helena counted out 340 in fixtures and 6 months' rent and gave the rest, $12, back to Sophia in a smaller envelope marked Sklep, shop. The receipt is folded inside the notebook. Paid in full, cash. Sophia opened the shop in May, ran it 23 years, bought the building in 1958, sold it in 1972, and put the money into a Pittsburgh National Bank account that became the down payment on her daughter's first house in 1983. That daughter, Helena's granddaughter, refinanced it in 2004 to send her own 2 children to college. 1 mil paycheck, 6 envelopes, 1 wedding envelope used differently. 3 generations of Kowalski women on 1 Brereton Street receipt. That is Rule 21, and it is the most important one. The envelopes were not budgeting. They were a moral architecture for a household that knew it had to outlast a single paycheck, by 3 generations. Stanisław was not careless with his lungs. He had been given one option: feed 8 children or quit. And the mill priced his lungs accordingly. It priced every Polish father's lungs on the hill the same way. It priced Eric's hands the same way, and the railroad priced Patrick's chest the same way. The institutions were captives of their own logic. The men were captives of the institutions. The women of the kitchen tables ran a counter-economy that did not exist on any company's books. Rule 22, Sigrid's pantry as pension. When Eric died in 1958, Sigrid was 60 and had no income of her own. The pantry was full. The neighbour calendar told her exactly when each Lutheran family's lean week was coming, and Sigrid was the one who had been carrying loaves to them for 40 years. So now they carried supper to her, on a rotation she did not have to ask for. She lived in the house Eric had built until 1985. The pantry was her pension. Rule 23. Mary's pension and railroad rule. When Patrick retired in 1976, after 37 years on the Pennsylvania Railroad, he had a union pension of $148 a month. Mary moved the pension into a new envelope system on the day the first check arrived. The account book has the transition month, old totals and new totals reconciled in her hand, balanced to the penny. Patrick died 3 years later. The Pullman Porters Brotherhood, which Patrick had paid dues to for 37 years, sent a death benefit check that paid for the funeral and the headstone. The dues paid the death. Rule 24. Helena's prayer as saving rule. After Stanisław died, Helena began a practice she described in the notebook only obliquely. Every prayer she said for him at the parish, she put 1 coin into a small glass jar by the stove. The jar emptied at the end of each month into the funeral envelope, or, in the years after Antonina also died, into late fees for her grandchildren's library books. The grief became small money in a slow jar. Rule 25. The inheritance rule. The rule the other 24 built toward, and the only one none of the 3 women ever wrote down. Every dollar that survived a Friday came to belong to the next generation, not to be left in a will, to be used in the lifetime of the woman, in the lifetime of her daughter, in the lifetime of her granddaughter. To put a shop on Brereton Street, to put a child through Penn State, to build a Lutheran credit union account in 1947 that paid a great-grandchild's tuition in 2018. Helena's row house on Dobson Street stayed in Kowalski hands from 1928 until 2018. 90 years. Held by Helena, then by Sophia, then by Sophia's daughter, then by Sophia's granddaughter, the great-granddaughter of a Polish steelworker who died of the lungs in 1956. Sigrid's daughter Ingeborg opened that Lutheran credit union account in 1947 with the $17 left in the Sparet column after Eric died. 3 generations of Lindgren women paid into it, and it paid out twice, once for a great-grandchild's first semester at Carnegie Mellon in 1996, once for a great-great-grandchild's first semester at Indiana University of Pennsylvania in 2018. Mary O'Connor's grandson Daniel, Patrick and Mary's youngest daughter's only son, graduated Penn State in 1986 on the compounded boarders' table income and the Buster Brown savings. He became a high school history teacher in Murraysville. He retired last year. His own grandchildren live in Lawrenceville now, 2 blocks from where the boarders' table sat. 3 immigrant working-class houses, 3 single paychecks, 25 rules, $22 a week in 1928, multiplied across a system that no investment account would have matched, because the principle was discipline, and the compounding was generational. If you have a grandmother whose husband carried a lunch bucket to a single paycheck, if you have a mother who put new shoes on your feet every September from a saving she had started the previous January, if there is a kitchen in your memory where envelopes came out of a shelf on a Friday afternoon and a woman with strong hands counted coins onto an oilcloth, what you have is one of these notebooks. You may not have the physical book. The book may have been thrown out by a son-in-law who did not know what it was. But what your grandmother knew is in your hands now, because she taught it to your mother, and your mother taught it to you, even if she taught it without naming it. Helena Kowalska died in 1987 at the age of 84. Her zeszyt came to me in 1991 from her daughter-in-law, who could not read Polish. Sigrid Lindgren died in 1991 at 93. Mary O'Connor died in 2009 at 88. They are gone now. What they knew is yours.